Alright, I think I'm back on the air. This is Kara Dreamer, back with her irregular series about Magick, getting into it, out of it, and now I'm going to talk about getting back into it. But before I say anything about that in particular, I would like to talk a little bit about my future plans for this channel and how I want to manage these broadcasts, as I've been calling them. I confess that I'm an old-fashioned sort of person. I like to think in terms of radio still, and I never quite liked the new terminology, talking about webcasting or you know, and then podcasting and stuff like that. Even though I've listened to a lot of podcasts, and before I started doing this, just talking extemporaneously like this, I had been considering whether I could do a podcast, and I thought of doing podcasts on a couple of different subjects. I thought of talking about chemistry, thought about talking about movies and media. I resisted doing so because I generally assumed that it was impossible for one single person to hold an audience. That you really needed an interplay. You needed a conversation to make podcasts interesting. Because that's how it seemed to me with stuff that I'd listened to myself. But then someone pointed me to a couple of years ago to I thought a very good historical podcast that was just one person delivering a kind of audio essay. They were obviously a polished broadcaster, possibly had professional experience, and they knew how to turn the podcast into a performance. And I realized that was how to make a single voice interesting. Conversation's easier. You can get more energy out of a conversation with less effort. Just throw a couple people into a room, stuff happens. A single person doing it alone has to work a little harder at it. Now, I'm not totally confident that I can do that, and I certainly wasn't confident when I was considering the idea of still just recording things and then just doing something conventional, recording a podcast and editing it and then releasing it. The thing that ended up making the difference for me was realizing that I didn't have to do any of that. I could simply turn on a mic and start talking. And I found that there was a certain thrill in that. And it appealed to my old-fashioned sensibilities, too. That I could imagine that I was talking on the radio. Especially since I got this big Yeti microphone that sort of looks like an old-timey mic, and I've got a screen on it, and it all feels very much like the kind of thing that I might have been interested in doing when I was 10 or something like that, and I was listening to old-timey radio all the time. So I want to keep that live feeling. On the other hand, the great virtue of podcasts, pre-recorded things, is that you can release them on a consistent schedule. And although, at the very least, I have been able to broadcast something once a week, and I've managed to keep that up for a while, that's given me a boost of confidence, I haven't really been able to keep a consistent schedule. And, of course, another problem is that no matter what time you pick, only a few people are ever going to be able to listen in. There's a certain commitment in just turning on dedicating your computer for an hour or more to one audio stream. I think it's actually more involving than video, like if you were just watching a game stream or something like that. That's something you can kind of tune out, or just or tune out the audio anyway. You're just watching it. So, basically what I'm saying is I'm going to be moving to I'm going to adjust how I do these things and how I advertise them and make them available. I think that basically releasing recordings, i.e. just doing a podcast, is probably the best way to go, but I still want to announce that I am recording the episodes for the podcast live and invite people to listen in then, if they have the time. Also, I want to look into transcription. Now, if need be, I can listen to my own recordings as much as I... let me say that one of the virtues of doing these things live is that I don't have to listen to recordings of myself. I have a certain phobia about that. I think a lot of us do, compounded with a touch of vocal dysphoria, since I am a trans woman, but someone who has I think a fairly male-sounding voice, and yet paradoxically a voice that I like. I'm proud of my voice. I wouldn't be doing all this broadcasting if I didn't like my voice, and didn't like what I could do with it and how expressive I can be. So I don't have as much of the fear of listening to my own voice that I used to, but it's still there. So it's been easier to do stuff live and just throw it out to the airwaves. I think might be having stream health problems. Let me hang on a second. Am I doing anything? Let me just check to see that there isn't a torrent, like my girlfriend isn't running a torrent or something like that. I'm just getting warnings from YouTube about the video output low. I don't know what that does to audio though, since the video is basically a placeholder. Just a second. Anyway, while I talk about that, I suppose I could always squeeze the bandwidth. I don't know if I could do that on the fly, is the thing. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, looks like things did actually hiccup there, and I took advantage of the break to like sort of squeeze the bit rate down. I'm probably gonna have to bump it up if I do video game streaming again. Anyway, I think that's enough preliminary talking about how I want to just the boring stuff about how I want to manage these broadcasts. I was going to say one more thing about transcription, which was that I'm prepared to prepare transcripts by hand simply by listening to my recordings and typing stuff out. I've been hoping, however, that voice recognition software might be able to help me there. I don't imagine for a second that it would produce a transcript that was accurate right off the top. I know I'd have to go through and edit it. But even if it got 99% of the work done for me, that would be a big help. Make the whole thing easier, less stressful. But people have told me, no, that stuff just still doesn't work right. Just don't depend on it. Anyway, that's something I'll be looking into. And if any of you has any advice on that subject, feel free to contact me. Which also reminds me, I need to do a better job of having like a profile with social media information and stuff like that on there. I've really been improvising doing all these broadcasts. Well, anyway, that out of the way, let's get back into Magick. Talking about Magick. I talked a bit about how I used to be interested in it, how I got into Wicca when I moved to Seattle, and then got back out of it. Gravitated towards Christianity and Catholicism, and then got out of that. And just to summarize in brief, the thing that attracted me most about Wicca was that it gave me a feeling of just the emotional satisfaction of dealing with ritual and sacred stuff, like actually touching it, manipulating it, and which is not something that I was used to. You tend to think of religion as something you sit down to. Speaking of which, I'm actually going to change the music. I thought this is a Cycles 2 from the Night in the Woods soundtrack, and it's one of my favorite pieces. But I think the Church of the First Coalescence music is actually more appropriate for this. Or maybe I'll try the Churchill music. Let's see that one. Yeah, I think that's a bit more... That's a bit better for a long talk. Anyway, so, you think of, we're conditioned as kind of just Americans, for the most of us anyway, to think of religion as something that you're talked at. Like that's what religious practice is. You go to a building or a room or whatever, and then someone reads out of a book and tells you what to believe, and it really sucks, and nobody gets anything out of it. So Wicca gave me a taste of something else, something more practical and hands-on, satisfying in that sense, but at the time anyway, nothing else about Wicca really satisfied me, so I didn't stick with it. And then I get into Catholicism, and that is more along the lines of what you think of conventional religion. Yeah, like I was going to church services. And now the virtue of Catholicism that you don't get from a lot of varieties of Christianity is that there's a little bit of hands-on element. There is some ritual that you're actually participating in. The service itself is a ritual. A lot of people complain about Catholic services for that reason. There's you have to stand up and sit down over and over again and stuff like that. But I liked that aspect of it. And then of course there's the fact that there's actual ritual manipulation. You get the host. You drink a sip of wine, and so Catholicism was able to satisfy that desire in me just enough to keep me happy, and it also had an intellectual basis that I could grasp. Like, as I've said already at some length, the kind of the central myth of Christianity ended up really, I had to conclude, just didn't really do anything for me. But the kind of intellectual apparatus that had been erected around that I had gotten through C.S. Lewis's and other Christian writers' apologetics was that interested me, kept my interest, and so that had a bit more going for it than Wicca did. But again, I fell away from it. And so, for a long time I was just sort of nothing again. And my route back towards that, from the roughly, over the roughly 15 years, from the time that I drifted away from Catholicism and then found myself back in the world of magic and paganism. It's had a lot of weird twists and turns, and God, it's been a fun ride. Seriously, even the worst of it, the last couple of years has been, I never thought stuff like this would happen to me, but. Well, I'll get into that I'll get into the juicy stuff in short order. Trust me. So the first stage of this return was this anabasis was discovering the furry subculture, and I think I might have talked about that a bit in the last broadcast, but I wanted to mention it again and bring up a couple of salient points that I may or may not have already mentioned. Sorry, it's all not that good. So furry was something that I was weirdly preconditioned to start liking. Even some years before I actually discovered what, quote, furry, unquote, was, I'd developed this curious affinity with the unicorn as a symbol that it was something that I started to work on right towards the end of my college education when I was getting that classics degree that I've talked about, and in the years to follow. It was, I have to admit, partly a joke on myself that I was feeling really insecure about myself. I felt very lonely and strange, and also was, for the first time, kind of aware of that. Like, even, you know, here it was my mid-20s, and like my sort of romantic and sexual experience was nil, just because I'd simply hadn't been brought. It was a combination of just neurodivergence, since it's pretty plain to me now that I'm probably autistic to a degree, and so not being that, not understanding people, not really having the same reactions to people that neurotypical people have, and also being raised by a family that was desperately emotionless, where the, you know, I was living with parents who didn't have any affection for one another, and just never ever talked about it either. So, like, you know, I just, it was all a mystery to me, and it wasn't until the 20s that I was like, oh wait, yeah, like, being with people would be nice, having sex would be nice, like, why am I not doing these things? So I ended up kind of joking to myself that, well, you know, at least unicorns would want to hang out with me, because of the old jest, or the old idea that unicorns are attracted to virgins. And I started to collect unicorns, like plushies, and I even tried to wear a bit of unicorn jewelry. I still have a little bit left over from that period, including this silver ear clip. I'm not sure how to describe it. It's a thing that hooks over my left ear, and has a silver unicorn kind of. It's a little bit uncomfortable, and now that I've finally come out trans, and I'm exploring doing something about my personal style and appearance, I'm thinking of wearing jewelry again. But anyway, so I had this unicorn thing, and then sometime in the mid 2000s, I don't even quite remember exactly how, it just something that sort of happened when I was looking for sexy fantasy art online, that I started finding all this anthropomorphic art. And yeah, I'm one of those people that got into furry because of the porn. Alright. Oh, I'm owning that right now. But I found that, and then I found this whole community of people who, well, furries, who had this sense of identity about themselves as intelligent animals, and it was just so fucking cute. I don't know how else to put it. I mean, I found myself drawn to people who are interacting with each other through this means, through these virtual identities as, you know, cute foxes and kitties and horsies and all the rest of it. And I was just like, I knew there was no logical reason for me to want to do that, except all I knew is it was something I wanted to do. And then there came a crucial moment at a party, when like around about the time that I was starting to get that curiosity about this. As one of those chances do, like synchronicity, as people call it, that I was at some party with some kind of some friends who paradoxically were people that I had gotten to know through my Wiccan days. Like, so it's like the 2001 days. These were people, a group of people that had some connection to the Aquarian Tabernacle Church and to the Spring Mysteries that I've talked about, and they had some kind of games night, and they had parties, and they were all just kind of, I don't know, Seattle techie types, mostly. Not really people I'd hang out with anymore, to be perfectly honest. And, I don't remember exactly how it happened, but somehow Furry got mentioned in one of the party conversations, and my ears pricked up at that, and I was like, oh yeah, you do that faux naive thing. You're like, oh yeah, Furry. I think I just heard something about that. What's it all about? And the response was just completely sarcastic and awful. It's like, oh yeah, these people who think they were animals want to have sex with animals, you know. And to my surprise of self-discovery, I was offended. I already kind of knew that this was not how, like this was a shitty way to talk about. This is a shitty way to talk about a subculture that, for all its ups and downs, for all of its shitty politics and intersection with all the terrible, like, you know, sexism and bigotry and the rise of neo-fascism. You know, the furry subculture has been tainted by all of these things, and yet it keeps its sense of community. I have found the furry subculture to be very loving and supportive, and embracing diversity like no other culture that I've ever come into contact with. Yeah, like furries are on the whole really cool, and on the whole they seem to be resistant, as other subcultures have not been, to the virus of fascism that is just infecting everyone now. All of our communities. Furries are rejecting that. But that's kind of looking forward. At the time, all I knew was just like, but these people are having so much fun, and it looks so cool. And the art's really sexy, although I better not mention that. Anyway, I didn't say anything at the party, of course, but I think within a week, probably, I had created my first fursona, and joined a forum called Furtopia, a somewhat unfortunate place, but still, it was my first furry home, and it was also how I met my girlfriend. It was how I met Daria, who was not Daria at the time, but yeah, so that was a thing, and from the first, I adopted the persona of an anthropomorphic unicorn. So that ended up being the persona that I kept for a long time, until a much more recent event that I will that is more directly relevant to getting into Magick. But I mean, this still was an important development because, well, first, it was getting me used to the idea of accepting fantasy. I don't even like use the word. I don't even quite want to use the word fantasy, but like basically, these were people who liked to live in, kind of virtual reality, a world of the imagination. It was my first exposure to role-playing, where people will just be in character and talk and do things in this shared again, I keep gravitating towards the word fantasy, even though I don't want to use it. But this shared alternate reality, let's put it that way. And that has become very important to me, just as a model for finding a way for my brain to accept that Magick, with a K, was something I could see myself doing, although I didn't know that at the time. At the time, it was just, yeah, I want to be a unicorn, and here I am. All my friends want to be foxes or cats or whatnot, and now I can do that. And then further conversations and friendships in the furry subculture introduced me again to people who identified as practitioners of paganism and witchcraft. It didn't draw me back into those communities then, but at least it. Oh, hey, I got a visitor. Hi, Wolfie. Good to see you. I need to pay more attention to the chat. I'm kind of staring off at the ceiling and stuff like that. Again, autism. But, anyway, so, yeah, like, I was now kind of low level in contact in society, again, with people who did these things. I didn't get back into them, and I didn't really talk about that stuff too much, other than to say, oh yeah, I've done it, mild curiosity. But so yeah, that was part of my society again. Oh, and I should just say in general that one of the things that happened when I drifted away from Catholicism is that I lost that sense of being part of a community. That was probably the most important thing that I got out of it, aside from the little bit of pleasure I got from the services themselves. I admit that I actually, as I said before, that I actually liked going to church, for the most part, in a low-level way. So, when I lost that, I lost a sense of community, but then Furry gave it back to me. It was online for the most part, but that would slowly change. Especially after I met my girlfriend. It was a rather wild time. Because it was someone I met online, and she was far, far away, but it was just like we just like fell desperately in love with one another. It's like, oh, we gotta be together. And then I traveled out to I did, like so many of the sort of stereotypical furry don'ts, about jumping into a relationship and like traveling vast distances with no prospects to just like be with someone that you barely know, and but it all worked for me. And so I I fell in love and I got into a relationship that endures to this day, and two people tend to socialize faster than one. So once that happened, it meant that I started to actually know people in real life who are furries, and consider these to be my group of friends, and not just something that was online. But still, that, like, this was actually kind of the first time in my life that my online life and my real life started to merge. That one graded into the other. That there were people that I knew just online and people that I knew just in real life, but there was also a continuum of people in between, which is something that was not actually really present in my life before. I had an online life through, like, Usenet in the earlier days, in like the 90s, and then for a little while I was doing C.S. Lewis mailing, like the C.S. Lewis mailing lists for my online social life, and like there wasn't no connection between people I knew in real life and that, but it was very, very infrequent. It's just like one or two people, and usually people that I hardly ever saw. And, to jump ahead a little bit, I think that for a really vital sense of spirituality and religion, and just in the general sense of spirituality put into practice, that community is important. I don't think it's really possible to be a strictly solitary practitioner, especially as I've become more and more convinced that spiritual entities are kind of properties of networks of people. That if they have an objective reality, it is a reality composed of the connections between people. And if you're not actually interacting with people, even if it's just online, your only source of connection to that network is going to be indirect. It's going to be through reading and media and stuff like that. And, that's something, but it's just one way. It's read-only access to reality. So, like, the mere fact of being in a culture, and a culture that was overlapping more and more with my daily face-to-face life, that was an important part of this journey. But still, it was just, furry was furry for a long time, and it didn't really go any past than that. Although, well, it did one other thing that I think is probably important, which is that when I joined the furry subculture for the first time, so this is around late 2000, very, very late 2004 and 2005 is when I was just ramped up my my furriness. For a brief time, it turned me into a writer, and I was writing madly. Like I was like skipping lectures, and like I was trying to make a go of school again at the time, just through like community college and stuff. And but I was like skipping out on classes in order to write furry fiction, and also like to look at furry shit on class computers. But all of this writing, wasn't very good, and it was really kind of just most of it was thinly disguised autobiography, because I was being reached for the first time in a long time with fresh thoughts about kind of where I'd come from, and like, why was I the way that I was? Who was I? And I actually, I wasn't planning to talk about I was almost planning to move on from just furry, but actually, I think I need to stay on the subject of furry for a bit because I've been talking about some of the attractions of the subculture, about a sense of community and of shared imagination and all that, but I want to talk about something more personal and something that would become very, very important in the last couple of years, which is what being furry does to one's sense of identity. And I remember not too long after I discovered the furry subculture, I was in therapy and I was seeing this shrink that really didn't do me any good, to be honest. As much as I liked her, she was really smart, but she was smart as a doctor. You know, like she knew a lot about medicine. And because I was interested in medicine, just the same way that I'm interested in about 10 million other things, I'm a compulsive reader. My sessions with the shrink were just kind of like talking. We ended up talking about medicine all the time. And it was really no help to me as therapy, and all the real concrete help that she was able to give me was taking lots of drugs that turned out to do no good. And but I remember writing for her this thing about, like, where basically I looked at myself and realized that I didn't know who I was. And I didn't know why I was getting a sense of identity out of furry, because it made no sense to me. All of my training and socialization told me that what I was doing was bullshit. That it was fantasy. That it didn't make any sense. But as I put it in this piece that I wrote, which is long lost, the way that I was able to explore it was that I could apply labels to myself, and I could say, okay, am I a scientist? Well, no, like I hadn't actually succeeded in the sciences, even though I wanted to call myself a scientist. But I didn't feel I couldn't claim that as an identity. Could I say I am a Christian or I am a Catholic? And again, I had to say, like, well, again, no, like, I can't honestly say that I believe in that stuff. Like, I could utter the words of the Nicene Creed, but I wouldn't believe them. You know, it's just like, really? Like, okay, I'll say that I do this. But for some reason, saying I am a unicorn felt right in a way that saying all these other things to myself hadn't. And it led to absolutely nothing vis-a-vis therapy, as you might imagine. But I realize now that, you know, I'd reached an important conclusion about myself, which is that saying that I was something other than human made sense to me in a way that other things didn't. And that was an important realization about myself that actually, I think, kind of the full import of which wasn't to land on me for many, many years. Because for the great bulk of my time in the furry subculture, I was in it in a relatively shallow way. If you'd asked me what I thought my persona was, I said, well, you know, it's this idealization, you know, it's just sort of who I think it would be fun to be, you know, blah 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 blah, you know, all this kind of really detached way of looking at it, sort of the Uncle Kage version of what it is to be a furry, that you're just wanting to relive your childhood or something like that. And and there's truth in that. I was coming to believe that I'd had childhood stolen from me. I didn't and at the time, and this is something that continues to be a problem. And although I think I understand better why it's a problem now, is that I didn't really remember. I didn't remember very much of childhood at all, and most of what I remembered was just this vague sense of unhappiness, not connected to any actual event. Like I remember, you know, sorry, this is going to get a little heavy. Like I used to think that, you know, maybe something bad had happened to me as a kid, and I just didn't remember it. You know, like that would explain things, right? But I'm pretty well satisfied now that no, you know, that's not what happened. But, you know, what happened was that I was dysphoric. What happened was that I was trans and didn't know it, and all I knew was just this vague sense that everything about me was wrong. But anyway, you know, it wasn't just that, though. That realization was far in the future. I mean, what I did remember, though, is that I had, you know, really kind of like, you know, parents who raised me indoors, who just wouldn't let me do things, who kept insisting that I had to be all mature, kind of grown up. Like I was, I've had a babysitter who saw me when I was like 4, say like, yeah, it was kind of creepy. Like you were just like really quiet, and you just sort of read newspapers and stuff like that. And it's just like, yeah, like I've learned since then that that's something that happens in toxic families, and like families where the parents or one or the other parent is a narcissist, is you know, because they want the kid to live for them, they try to turn the kid into like a mini adult, into someone that they can actually deal with, because they're not equipped to deal with a child as a child. And that's basically what happened to me. And you know, it's, on the one hand, it's one reason that people came to think of me as just fearfully smart. This is because like oh yeah, like you're like you know, doing all this like, you know, really advanced stuff, and you're like 10 years old, you know, things like that. You know, just because of the stuff that I got, you know, I was reading and studying stuff on an advanced level, partly because that was what my parents were actually happy with me doing. But yeah, like I didn't have really toys or you know, I didn't have friends my own age and all this stuff. And the furry subculture is full of people like me in this regard. People from just with shitty childhoods, or they just never felt like they actually had a chance to be children. So yeah, like furry definitely does have a large measure of hurt people, you know, people who have been badly wounded and are learning to live with that as adults, realizing the value of returning to a kind of second childhood, to, you know, that bad phrase, because that's kind of used for like Alzheimer's, like second childhood, but you know what I mean. Like your background, Jesus, your background and your upbringing didn't give you a proper childhood, so now you're going to have one. Just have fun for once. Be a cute, fuzzy creature who likes to play with, you know, balls and stuff like that. And so that was important. And again, to jump forward for a moment, my development as a witch, getting back into magic and witchcraft, ended up becoming intimately tied with reconnecting with who I actually was, which meant getting in touch with all of myself, including the childish parts. So, yeah, like, Furry was starting to reach me. Starting to make me think, who am I really? And starting to give me, for the first time, the thought, well, if you don't like who you are, then become someone else. Even if it's just a fantasy unicorn. And I honestly, because I think Magick is, at bottom, the process of changing yourself. Like, I think it is a mistake to think of Magick as something you do to the world. That was the problem that I had with Wicca and its sort of version of ceremonial magic, the kind of Aleister Crowley sort of magic, but it's all about, imposing your will on, do it, and it harm none, do as thou wilt. It sounds great, it sounds empowering, but it also sounded really strange to me, because I didn't feel like I had that sort of influence on the world. Like, it made no, like, just because I was doing a spell didn't mean that was doing anything. It was necessary for me to start thinking about these things in terms of self. And, I sort of had a glimmer of that when I was in Wicca earlier. Like, there was a little bit of talk about magic as a kind of applied psychology. But I really had no, I couldn't make that knowledge real to myself. Because, like, you can't really, you could talk about psychology in the sort of intellectual, abstract way, but if you don't actually have a sense of your own psychology, if you don't even know how you work, like, if your own thought processes are a mystery to you, you can't possibly hope to just psychologize yourself. It's hopeless. You have to examine yourself. And Furry ended up, very, very slowly at first, giving me some kind of mechanism for starting to think about that. Because when you create a persona, when you create this new identity with a new childhood and everything else, I think if you have any kind of investment, emotional investment in the matter, you're going to start using the occasion of doing that as a way of thinking about, well, what about myself would I like to be different? What do I want my persona to be that I'm not? So it starts to put that idea into your head. Starts to make you think about yourself just a little bit. Like, I know that this is not a sure thing. There's plenty of furries out there who have no self-awareness. I mean, I think a lot of them just end up becoming Nazi furs because it's just like they were grasping for a sense of identity and couldn't work it out and just ended up grabbing for something that seemed cool. Like, I think that's what ends up drawing a lot of people into of people in many subcultures into the fascist versions of those things, is because it's like it's a ready-made identity. It's identity you don't have to do any kind of work on. You're just told, yep, this is the cool thing. Yep, like SS uniforms. It's like, wear this, you're a furry of substance. It's just like, yeah, I'm not. I'll get off that subject. That's all unpleasant. Anyway, so that's what Furry gave me. The really crucial thing, though, wasn't to happen for a while, and didn't start to happen until a couple years ago. Was moving on from Furry to the smaller subculture that is called Otherkin. Now, I can't claim to know, like, Otherkin is it's even though I consider myself Otherkin now, it's a subculture that I can only say that I've really brushed the surface of. And it was one of these things that I was vaguely aware of through most of my early furry years. Like, I knew that, oh yeah, there's people who really consider themselves to be these animals. Yeah, they don't just see it as like a shared imagination. They don't just see it as a fantasy. They see it as a reality for themselves. And at the time, that seemed so weird to me. How's that possible? You know, like, here I was saying that I was a unicorn, but it was like, oh, unicorns don't exist. Like, I know this is just sort of something I'm making up. That was what I told myself. And, so, at first, I kind of kept my distance from people who seemed to take it a step further than that. I have to admit. Sorry. But a number of social circumstances, starting, as I said, about 2 years ago, 3 to 2 years ago. I don't remember exactly. I started to make friends directly, so close personal friends who were Otherkin, and in very particular, I fell in love with someone who was Dragonkin. We're not together anymore. It's too bad, but she's still someone this relationship did a whole fucking lot for me, and I learned so many things from my partner, from my excuse me. Although she was going as a griffin when I met her and fell in love with her, and we ended up kind of both going dragon at the same time. Although for her it was something that she'd already had knowledge of. She was already part of this community, even though she wasn't explicitly identifying as a dragon at the time that I met her and fell in love with her. But anyway, so I'm going to tell you this. There's no better way to start identifying or empathizing with, and maybe even identifying with, something that previously made no sense to you than falling in love with someone who is into it. Because if you're really close to someone, you start to understand how they think. And here was this very dear friend and eventually lover of mine who, basically said, yes, I consider myself to be something other than human deep down. And without going into details, just honestly just seemed and felt like something that really kind of made sense for her. She was an unusual person with unusual habits, and that I thought very endearing. And, who was I to say that it wasn't real? I was at the very least prepared to accept that it was real for her, and that it gave her life a sense of structure and purpose that I wasn't going to take away from anybody. with my crude materialism and positivism, because yes, I still consider myself a scientist, someone who likes to reach logical conclusions about the world. But the fact of being in a very imaginative subculture and then getting into a subset of it that was even more imaginative, it was very. It was giving me something other than just boring old materialism to start believing in just a little bit. And then and then something intervened. Something big, and it's This was the bolt from the blue, and it's the one part of the story that I feel a bit. How do I put it? I should just jump ahead and say, like, basically, I had a spiritual experience, or something that I think of as a spiritual experience. I had a vision, and that's the part of the story that, on the one hand, is in a sense the most important, is very important. Is crucial to my development. But on the other hand, it's like, oh, how can I presume to give anyone advice or reassurance on how to get into witchcraft if I'm saying, well, you have to have a spiritual experience first? Yeah, I mean, make of that what you will. All I can say is that it happened to me. And what actually happened was, not too long after some really close and meaningful personal time with my griffin/dragon partner, and also, and I'm not coincidentally, I think, my playing Undertale, and I'll have more to say about that. I had an extended experience. It was more tactile than seen, although there was like kind of shadowy visuals with my eyes closed. It was kind of a three-part experience where I felt at first like I was like a sort of round object, sort of moving through space, and I had this sense of flow lines going around me. Like if you've ever seen a diagram in a fluid mechanics book of laminar flow around a sphere, those kind of smooth flow lines. That was kind of what the vision was like. The phone's ringing, but I'm not going to be able to get it. Anyway, so and then that progressed to a sort of more an undulating sense, a sense of almost swimming, and fluidity. And then finally, there was a part of the experience where it seemed that I was aloft, that I was flying, and it was huge and had wings, and there was this kind of vague landscape before me, and this whole experience, which, by the way, happened like right in the middle of talking to my ex, my dragonkin partner, talking online. It had that feeling about it that I'd gotten from very, very few experiences in the past. The feeling that I think of as a spiritual feeling, and I want to talk a little bit about, well, what does that mean? when you say, I had an experience, well, how did it feel? Well, it felt like a spiritual experience. Well, what does that mean? And the trouble is, it's very hard to say what that means. It's, to me, a spiritual experience, like, it is an emotion. It is not, however, a particular emotion. It is more like you're feeling every emotion at once. Like if you, in the depths of a really profound spiritual experience, you feel like laughing and you feel like weeping and you feel joy and fear and everything all at once. And also, as to refer to C.S. Lewis again, you get a sense of longing. Like, you realize that you've just gotten a glimpse of something that you've known you've wanted, even though you never could have told anybody in waking life that it was something you wanted. You had to be shown first. That's what having a spiritual experience is like. You have this feeling and you think, where was this all my life? I had echoes of feelings like that before. The moments that, you know, the things that C.S. Lewis called Sehnsucht or longing or joy. And they had been very, very few, and I hadn't had anything like that in a long time. Nothing I ever did as a Catholic ever did that. And nothing I really ever did as a Wiccan ever did that either. I did, however, have, sort of in connection to paganism, a couple of experiences like that. Including one that happened in Italy, actually, when outside the cave of the Cumaean Sibyl in Etruria. Campania, rather. But here, so all those previous moments were in connection with sort of external circumstances that were explicitly religious in some fashion. Like when I was reading the end of Till We Have Faces and had that moment, it was, you know, I was reading something that was I was reading a work of religiously inspired fiction. When I had that moment outside the cave of the Cumaean Sibyl, that was in connection with something with an older religious or spiritual practice. But here was this experience that just landed on me that didn't seem to be stimulated by anything in particular at all, and certainly nothing religious. It felt like a spiritual experience. But what was it trying to tell me? Like, I've talked a little bit about the difference between spirituality and religion. That you know, you have spiritual experiences, and then religion is sort of, well, what do I do with this information? Like, how do I alter my life? What things do I do? Acting on the information that I've gotten, that either I have gotten from a spiritual experience or that someone else has gotten from a spiritual experience. So I had this experience of being an egg, as I came to see it, and of swimming and of flying. And the only real conclusion that I could come to, based off of just, you know, because this is something that my partner, my Dragonkin partner, talked about before. Like, this is a shared Otherkin experience. Like she said, yes, I had an experience like this, where I felt that I literally felt that I was a dragon. And that's how I chose. I made a crucial decision at that point, which was basically, I don't know what basically I told myself I had this experience. I don't know what it means. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing about it. However, I will accept it at face value. I'm not going to do the materialistic, positivistic thing, which would just be to say, oh, well, my temporal lobe had a moment, and I saw some weird shit, and it was cool, and it made me feel all weird, and, but yeah, it was like, I had a brainstorm, it's over now, back to reality. Like, I could have interpreted it that way. It would have been easier. I wouldn't have had to do anything about the experience in that case. I chose not to do that, though. And so that happened in roughly April or May 2017. Or sorry, 2016. God, I keep... It's 2018 now, Kara. Anyway. So yeah. It was a religious awakening, but it was an awakening to a religion that I didn't even have yet. So, well, what did that end up doing to me then? This sort of, well, I'm a dragon now. Well, for one thing, it gave me a bit of trouble as to like why I had this earlier persona. Like, why was I going around saying I was a unicorn all the time? And then had this experience. What did that mean for the unicorn identity? And the conclusion that I came to at the time was that it was it was kind of a mistake. In fact, I ended up coming up with a sort of more fanciful way of interpreting it, which is that the dragon inside me was asleep but dreaming, and the dragon couldn't dream of being themselves right away. They just kind of grabbed for other images, other fantasies that it could give some kind of clothing to, and that was my unicorn self. That was Monoceros, or just Mono, as I came to be called, or I changed it Monoceros, and then I changed that to Monophilos, but Mono. Yeah, Mono was me. Mono was my unicorn. And it had come to be a comfortable identity, but I was sort of regarding it now as, oh, that was like a suit of clothes you were putting on. And that was, I think, a wrong way of looking at it. But, this was a confusing time. Stuff was starting to happen to me that I didn't think would ever... At one time, I thought would never happen. And all I could do was kind of struggle to keep up with it. For the first time in my life, I was making decisions about me and spiritual decisions that weren't just stuff that I got out of books. Wasn't just stuff that I thought was cool because I saw other people doing it. Stuff was happening to me, and it was up to me to try to figure out how to deal with it. But because I had my partner, my second partner at the time, because I was with Daria, I'm still with Daria, I'm poly, that not just her, but her friends, her circle of friends, all of her close friends being like herself, being otherkin. For the most part. I mean, I assume that wasn't universal, but it just... I got drawn closer and closer into this group of people that had a much more radical sense of otherness about them than I had known before, and who additionally were a lot more likely than the run of sort of general furry culture to be into spiritual things, to be into paganism and magic. So that process of association accelerated rapidly after the Dragonkin thing happened to me. That still didn't push me into necessarily doing anything about it, but more and more it was just something that I saw people close to me into, including my partner, and who didn't necessarily have any sort of organized way of doing it. Like, you know, Wicca, from back when at least, had some sort of kind of, like, it was churchy in at least a little sense, in the sort of conventional sense, or it was like, yeah, like you go to a room and people tell you to do things and you do them. There was enough of that element in Wicca, that conventional idea of how a religion is supposed to work, that it was something that I could at least do, even though I wasn't necessarily getting anything out of it. But the spiritual people that I was coming to know through my partner, and my partner herself, were far more idiosyncratic, and what people who, in the language of neo-paganism, would call themselves solitaries. People not in a coven or in some kind of religious group with a defined body of practice. As people who are trying to go their own way. And that was important to me, because I wasn't happy with the symbolism and rituals that were being handed to me and said, these are meaningful. Well, so why are they meaningful? Just trust me. You know, I was slowly being made to realize one of the most important things about spirituality and religion. If it doesn't mean anything to you, personally, there's no point in doing it. You have to have some kind of connection with what you're doing. Like, let's connect it back up with when I was Catholic. The Eucharist is a ritual that I could participate in, because I was able to bring myself to believe just a little bit that this was something that could make sense. You know, that the Son of God, you know, could have the power to basically turn, you know, not like sort of in the turn in the transubstantiation sense necessarily, but at least in some sort of metaphysical, symbolic sense, turn bread and wine into representations of himself, and that you could take his spirit in this ritual way. I mean, I was able to sort of, you know, kind of at least want to believe that was something that was possible, and therefore I could do it. I like to do it. I like taking the Eucharist. I really did. But, you know, all the rest of it definitely did see, you know, like most of the rest of it anyway, it really did seem like, what was this? Like, I'm told this guy, like, died for my sins. Like, what does that mean, even? And yeah, because that brings me into touch with another thing that happened during this time, to sort of this is a tangent that I didn't quite anticipate going into, but I think it is actually important in this part of the story. Is I had one of the very serious problems that was afflicting me through all this time was alcoholism, and what little treatment I had gotten for it was very much of the kind of AA sort, which is very sort of Christian themed, kind of the idea that you have no power over alcoholism. Like, you're supposed to turn your will over to someone else, and that's how you learn to deal with it. But then when I finally got treatment for alcoholism that worked from group therapy at a place called Seattle Counseling Services, their approach was something that again, one of these things where you don't really know that you needed it until you get it. Which is that it was very much about, no, you do have power over yourself. You have the ability to control how you respond to your own cravings. Basically, it's sort of like Babby's first cognitive behavioral therapy. Looking at your own behavior, realizing, oh wait, these are stimuli that are going to make it more likely for me to drink. These are things that I do to myself that end up driving me back to the bottle. I can't change the availability of alcohol. I can't change the fact that I'm hurting, but I can change circumstances so that it makes it easier for me to live without drink. By stages. And so that was an experience that started putting in my mind, getting back to that idea that magic is really about changing yourself. Well, so was this. This was changing myself. Realizing that thinking more about how I behaved, how my brain worked, at least in the sense of, like, well, why does my brain make me want to, drown it with alcohol? It was needed. I needed to start learning how to think that way. So here's the situation as of about, this takes us up to about a year ago. Like, I was getting pushed towards this idea of an idiosyncratic spiritual practice. It's one where it's kind of, you make your own way, and one where you are encouraged to think of it as working on yourself rather than as like something that you're told to do. And then I had another very important spiritual experience, and I think I'm already well over an hour, and I'm gonna have to start thinking about gearing up for work. So the story, what I'm about to tell, is going to be, like, the last 10 minutes are going to tell, in very brief, the story of how I met Loki. Loki. The Norse trickster god, very famous. Also, the star of a few movies and comic books, a version thereof, anyway. The Loki in my head does not look like Marvel Loki, but anyway. So because of my relationship, my Dragonkin partner and all of her friends, Otherkin friends, and who, a lot of whom were into magic and stuff like that, I was starting to be more alive to the possibility that, God, maybe this stuff is actually happening. So, like, we were getting pulled towards sort of drawing, for sort of subsets within subsets within subsets. I talked about Furry, I talked about Otherkin within Furry, and now I was getting to know people who are into a particular subculture called post-furry, and which still is kind of a mystery to me. Like, I wanted to say something about post-furry. It's hard for me to define what that exactly is. Think of it as a sort of intersection of furry subculture with the idea of transhumanism. Like the idea that not only can we imagine ourselves to be other than human, but we could actually, in a sense, work towards that, making it, making the fantasy blend with reality, and also that getting towards a more general sense of identity, in the sense that, well, you could imagine yourself to be like an anthropomorphic animal, or even an anthropomorphic magical creature, like a dragon or a unicorn, but why stop there? The sky's the limit. Like, you can, like, basically sort of blurring and turning into a continuous spectrum what we imagine to be this solid divide between the world of imagination and the real world, in all, in form and thought and personality, all of it. And my interaction with the post-furry subculture has not been entirely happy. I will admit it. There was some stuff that, kind of, I'll say, like, happened largely because, this relationship that I've been alluding to in this broadcast that I got so much out of ended up falling apart. And there was bad blood and rancor, and I'm really sorry for all my part in the business. But that's all in the past. I am prepared to look back on all that and say, well, yeah, all right, so there was some pain and shit, but I ended up meeting a lot of really, really cool people and learning so many cool things from my partner, my ex, and her friends. So I'm just gonna move on from there. And so because of my getting drawn into the penumbra of this post-furry community, I was meeting more and more people who were just explicitly spiritual. It wasn't just dabbling for them. It was something they took very, very seriously. And that was a draw. I was attracted to people who took these things seriously. I really was progressing rapidly from the dabbling phase, like, oh, this is cool, into, I want to do this. How do I do this? I didn't know yet. But I was still just alive to the possibility that, yeah, like, maybe magic is real. But wouldn't it be cool if it was real? Wouldn't it be great if magical things actually happened? And then one did. It was in October of 2016, and gearing up towards Samhain, like what the neo-pagans have christened Halloween, the 31st of October. And just interesting things were happening. Like just there was this sense of expectation in the air. It's hard to describe. Like my metamor, my girlfriend Daria's other partner, her boyfriend, for example, this described out of the blue, like one time during this October. Yeah, like I started to see a lot of coyotes. Yeah, like I was driving, you know, to work, and there was just like coyotes crossing the road and stuff like that. It's, you know, that's really, huh? Yeah. That's funny. And other kinds of things like that were happening. There was an air of the trickster, because the coyote is well known as a trickster figure. But, and so the you know, other kind of weird shit was happening, and the idea was entering my head that some trickster was trying to get my attention. I couldn't tell you why exactly I felt that way. Maybe I just wanted to feel it. You know, I was flattered to think that I had that kind of attention from another entity. And so in that context, I go off on a trip with a friend to Portland, and one of the things that I do with this friend all the time is go to a couple of the thrift shops in Portland. They're a lot better than the Seattle ones, I think. And in the main Seattle Goodwill, I was browsing through their knickknacks, you know, just all the shelves of tchotchkes and little figurines and things. And right in the middle of all that stuff was a book. The book was way out of place. Like it was, the books were shelved on practically the other side of the store. Someone had obviously, they picked up this thing and then just dropped it there and left. You know, like people always do in stores. They don't bother to take stuff back where it can be shelved properly. It's like, oh, okay, whatever. And I pick up the thing, and it's this interesting thing, and I'm actually going to show a picture of it on the stream here. I can do that. I'll have to search for it though. Volume. Okay. Yeah. Images. There we go. That'll do. Good enough. Copy. Go to OBS. Turn on browser source. Browser source. Paste the image URL. And bingo! Just gonna kind of expand that a little bit, and then I'll just leave that up there. And so this is actually a periodical, or it's a collection of writings called Tyr. And I'll say right away, it's not very good. I am not recommending anyone race out and try to read this thing. And you can read it online if you're curious. And it's this work of writings in connection to... It's connected with neo-paganism, or in a... oh, fuck. It's a cramp. Anyway, in connection with, like, specifically, I'm not saying this very well. There's a whole body of, work where, like, people are, consciously rejecting modernism and looking backwards for a sense of identity and grabbing onto what they imagine to be the ideals of pagan cultures and religions and wanting to revive them. Like a Satru is very much about this. Like, in particular, this reconstructed Norse paganism. And Tyr, as you might imagine from the name, Tyr was let me remind myself here. Tyr was one of the Norse pantheon, the Germanic god associated with law and heroism, the son of Woden, and in one of the most important stories about Tyr is portrayed here on the cover. that Loki had a lot of kids, and one of those kids was Fenrir, or Fenris Wolf. And the gods were afraid of Fenrir and decided to try to capture him. And they couldn't. Fenrir was just broke every chain that they tried to wrap around him. And eventually they commissioned a magical ribbon made from the sound of a cat's footfall and the beard of a woman and the roots of it's like basically this ribbon made out of things that don't exist. A ribbon so strong even Fenrir wouldn't be able to break it. But how do you put it on him? Like he's a slavering wolf. And Fenrir... They decided that the way to do it was they had to make Fenrir agree to do it. And it's like, why would this wolf agree to be bound? It's like, well, you know, as a dare. Kind of like, oh, you know, like, you're not going to be able to break this, huh? You know, and it's just like, trust, like, you'll be able to break it. Don't worry, like, this won't even be a thing. But Fenrir wasn't going to be happy with that and said, I will only do this thing if you agree that while you were binding me, Tyr, the god Tyr, will put his right hand in my mouth. And then you'll bind me. Well, they did it, and when Fenrir found that he wasn't going to be able to break this magical rope, he bit Tyr's hand off, and I think frankly Tyr, well, Tyr didn't deserve it, but you know, fuck, you know. Fuck the gods. just like, God fucking damn it. Yeah. Oh, God, Woden, you suck. Anyway. I flipped through this, you know, I picked this thing up in the Portland Goodwill, I flipped through it, and it looks, it arouses my intellectual interest a little. It's like, God, this is kind of dealing with stuff I've sort of, you know, touched on. I was into the Greek shit. Like, I wasn't really into Norse stuff. But it was kind of the, you know, it was still neo-paganism, you know, and it was sort of like promised to be sort of scholarly about it, and that was something that I told people I wanted. Like something that wasn't like kind of new agey and all about feelings and talking about symbolism and stuff in this sort of vague, unsatisfying way. I was interested in people who wrote like professors talking about neo-paganism, and it's like, okay, so I bought the thing and I took it home, and a couple days later, that feeling of expectation that I had had been growing on me in the month of October was getting even stronger and stronger, and I was just like, and there was just like this one night where, and I ended up actually like messaging my partner, my Dragonkin partner, my ex, saying, God, like who's trying to talk to me? I was like, something's going on here. And then it's like, you know, during the conversation, I'm like, wait, the book, like, why did I find that book? Like, why was that there? Like, you know, no! Because the only conclusion that made any sense, that if I accepted the premise that there was a trickster around me trying to get my attention, which was the feeling that I've been having, and I was asking who it was, and all of a sudden I find this fucking Tyr book with fucking Fenrir on the cover. There was only one person only one god it could be. And I started laughing. Like, I was It's like, Loki? Loki, are you kind of fucking kidding me? You know, it seemed like the biggest joke in the world. And imagery flashed through my mind so fast. And that's how it is when I have a spiritual experience. All of a sudden I just start remembering things. Stuff that happened to me years, decades ago. And basically, I was being told, I was being shown, look, you've been interested in me in a while. You just haven't really thought of it that way. Don't you remember how interested you were back in 1980 when you were 6 and got into Wagner's Ring? Watched that on TV because there was this big famous 1980 production of the Ring cycle at the Bayreuth, or however you say it, festival. That's kind of an infamous production, actually, like because it was all sort of modern and spare, and people thought, Wagner shouldn't be staged like that. But never mind that. And then I read kind of collected Norse mythology stuff from children's books, just like picture book stuff, and I remembered stuff about Loki the best. Same thing with stuff from Bullfinch's mythology when I was a teenager. That interest was always there. Loki was saying, already, I had my eye on him, but I hadn't really thought of it that way until a crucial thing that happened to me some years later. So this is during kind of my furry phase. Now, furry is kind of adjacent to the My Little Pony community. And I'm not too big a fan of My Little Pony, but I've watched some of the show, and I have friends who are into MLP, and I kind of think it's cute. Like, I sort of accept, Pinkie Pie and Applejack and all the rest of them as beloved characters, and I like them. And so a while back, I found this cartoon about Pinkie Pie talking to Twilight Sparkle about her the grandmother or great-grandmother. And I'll show you who that is. So I'm going to bring up another link here, if I can find it. Yes, here we go. And this is not going to show up too well on the browser image kind of thing here. I'll sort of fuck with the important bits of it to sort of get it to show up properly. It's a cartoon about Pinkie Pie telling Twilight Sparkle that her grandmother is Loki. Like, the Loki. God, that's really blurry. I'm sorry. Because I squeezed the bandwidth. And you may remember, those of you who know something about Norse mythology, that Loki once turned himself into a mare in order to get fucked by a stallion, and I can't remember exactly what this was about what the whole purpose of it was, but Loki ended up bearing a foal, an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir, who would become Odin's steed. Here was a comic that literally connected Pinkie Pie with Sleipnir, and therefore with Loki. And, like, if you know anything about My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, you'll know that how appropriate this is. Pinkie Pie is the trickster goddess of the Friendship is Magic universe. And, like, she's even got a dark side. As people who know anything about Pinkamena Diane Pai's sort of place in MLP fanfic, you know that. So now, go back. You fast forward to this sort of Loki experience. That the one that I was actually having was like, basically I was reminded that I had seen this comic. And that at that moment in my head, I decided that this was canon. Like, basically, yep, Pinkie Pie's Loki's, granddaughter. That's too cool not to be. That must be true. And then Loki hit me with it, which was, at that time, you didn't believe in me, but you believed in Pinkie Pie. Like, really. Like, basically, Pinkie Pie was real to you in a way that I wasn't. But you connected me to her, which means that you, ever so slightly, said you believed in me. Well, all that passed through my mind, and here I was laughing with tears streaming down my face that this ridiculous thing had happened to me because of a Pinkie Pie comic, and because of a book that I found in a thrift shop, and because I fell in love with the dragon, and because of all of these weird things that had happened to me all in the space of about a year. And I told Loki, yeah, you're on. Well, that doesn't quite bring us up to the present day, although in a way it does, because Loki is now one of my patrons. I've had many more experiences talking to Loki. Loki has been very important in my development. Someone I don't trust, but I respect. Because that's how it is with tricksters. Anyway, I think I really am running out of time here. I've got about 15 minutes left in which I need to get ready for work. But I think I've wrapped this broadcast up with a relatively satisfying conclusion. I hope you liked it. And I'll be back possibly earlier than the next Wednesday, but definitely by Wednesday, if no later. I'll be talking more about, basically, well, now that I got back to Magick and believing in something, what was I going to do with it? And what am I continuing? Like, how am I going to do something with this? And that is why this broadcast exists, because I'm hoping that in the process of talking about these things on the air, and talking not merely about where I've come from, but where I want to go, that it will help move me towards actually becoming what I want to be. And what I want to be is a witch. And I think I've already made some progress in that direction. And I hope to make more, and I hope to share it with all of you. And to get your help. I love you all. This is Kara Dreamer. Stay determined.